So it is my great pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Meghan Balk. Meghan is a postdoctoral fellow in the Evolutionary and Paleobiology group at the Natural Science Museum in Oslo, Norway. Her research interests are in exploring how abiotic and biotic factors drive trait evolution within lineages and across communities. Meghan uses museum collections and AI-driven techniques to extract trait data from fossil and modern specimens. Please join me in welcoming Meghan.
Great, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be back at the Smithsonian. I have missed it. It's also really nice to have a break from still winter in Norway, so I appreciate coming out here. So I'll be talking about how animals can persist to great change. I'll be looking at 3 different studies and hopefully convince people that looking at microevolution is maybe a nice strategy for understanding how past change has affected how animals evolve. So as already been said, we live in a changing planet. The world is changing drastically. This can be through biotic changes, as seen in the tan panel, where you have ecosystem functions changing when you remove or maybe add an animal to the ecosystem. It can be through habitat. The main takeaway from the middle panel is to see how the green colors change in intensity, change in location, change in size. So you get these habitat shifts that are expected to happen over time. And then also abiotic, such as temperature change, where we're going to see changes in how warm our winters are and how warm our summers are. And in response to this, animals have 3 options. They can adapt, like for this classic example of the moths adapting to industrialization and changing their frequencies of how many are dark black and how many are speckled. They can move, like these 3 species who have increased their northward range in response to current climate change, or they can die. And this can be complete extinction, it can be local extirpations, or it could be these seasonal events, these die-offs that happen. And global change has happened in the past, so we can use the fossil record to understand what did species do without humans? How did they respond to past climate change? And as example, nearly every mammal alive today has endured 150,000 years of climate change. So we know that animals are capable of persisting. What a lot of people look at is macro processes, such as extinction. So who were the losers in these events, who didn't make it? They also look at how did communities change. And so here we have a black dot on a map that shows where all these 4 species used to co-occur. And then over time, their ranges have shifted in response to natural climatic change. So people care about above the species level. I'm really interested in how do species persist? What allows them to handle biotic change, abiotic change, and habitat change? And for that, we need to take a micro approach and look through lineages. So here I don't care about who went extinct, I care about who are the winners, who are the survivors of these changes. And part of this research, we use the Phenotypic Evolution Time Series database, which is a new database of these time series that people can go explore. So I'm going to take everyone on a journey of 3 different examples that I have had throughout my career, spanning 3 different amounts of time. So really, really old, far back millions of years ago with big millions of years time steps, something in the middle, where again it goes back millions of years, but at smaller time steps, tens of thousands of years, and then something more close to modern, less than 1 million years with 1,000-year time steps. And I'll show how animals have responded to biotic, habitat, and abiotic change. So the first one is biotic change of a big shark that I'm sure a lot of people know. It's the last shark in a series of megatoothed sharks called Megalodon. And at the time when I did the study, it had a different genus, so I apologize. The genus name is no longer valid, but those are the figures that I have. But this shark responded to a lot of change. It lived in the Miocene, so it came around 13, 14 million years ago, went extinct around 2 to 3 million years ago. And during the time, there's a lot of change. So don't need to pay attention to details for most of my slides. I'll walk you through them. The main thing to look at is that temperature changed. It decreased by about 7 degrees Celsius through this time. So the oceans used to be kind of warm all over, and then you get this stratification of cooler polar, warmer tropics. So you get this big change in the oceans, you get change in productivity, and then you get a lot of change in their presumed prey species, which are marine mammals. Not only did they decrease in richness, so there's fewer species, they also greatly increased in size during this time. So you have two things happening. So to answer this study, we traveled to a lot of different museums, including the one here that has an excellent collection, measured over 600 teeth, and used allometric equations to estimate the body size of this shark, mainly because body size is a factor with a lot of life history traits, and there's an idea in the literature that prey respond to predation pressure, and so possibly predators respond to changing prey as well. So first thing is that this shark persisted through a lot of temperature and sea level change. It didn't contract its range, it kept its geographic range all the way from the past, that's all the way on your guys' right, through the future. And so then I was curious, what did it do in response to animals? So as an example, the maximum size of marine mammals when this shark came on the scene was about half a ton. By the time it went extinct, the maximum size of marine mammals was 3 times bigger, or a few orders of magnitude larger. And importantly, bigger than what it could handle. So I have another project looking at allometric relationships between what shark's body size and what they can eat. And so doing just a quick equation, the maximum prey size that the shark could eat would be around 3.6 tons. So much smaller than the maximum size of this animal. So I wanted to know, did it get bigger to eat more? And the answer is no. So we have their overall body size distribution in the top corner. And what you see is that through time, it doesn't shift at all. You don't get a shift towards larger individuals. You don't get a shift in demography, because this includes both adults and juveniles. They are resilient. And so the next direction that I'll be taking this is to understand what the predation pressure is and who they could have been eating. So likely this animal persisted through prey switching through time, because obviously it wasn't just the biggest things in the ocean. There were a lot of other things as well. And while this is hopeful, I do want to add a little disclaimer that while sharks are resilient and they're a very long-lived species, they're not resilient against humans and overfishing. This research has really put in, has really sharpened the role that humans have had in affecting shark populations. Right. The next example is going to be about habitat change and how this very cute creature has responded to habitat change. So I'm sure everyone is very familiar with bryozoans, these very cute little guys. They are clonal colonial species, so they're little families of identical individuals living in their own little apartments that you can see, and they fossilize well, and they're quite abundant. And for this group, Steganoprella magnifica, we looked back the last 2.3 million years to understand how they were changing to habitat change. And so these were collected in the North Island of New Zealand, and we have 6 formations that we look through, plus we have a modern record as well, so we can really see how these animals have changed. And to give you an idea of how much their habitat changed, here again, the squiggles are what's important, not what they say. The main takeaway is that there's over 100 meters of sea level change that they were enduring, as well as around 3 degrees Celsius of temperature change in these more shallow waters. Additionally, there were changes in abundance and richness of other bryozoan species, so likely the things that they might be competing against at the time, that really changes through time. And so this is what a bryozoan fossil looks like. This is one of the bigger individuals, so you can actually see all their little homes on the shell. And we used machine learning to landmark and then extract the traits, because the type of research we were doing is looking at multivariate trait change, and those are very data-hungry models. So instead of spending close to a year measuring everything by hand, we a colleague, Arthur Porto, put together deep bryo and ML morph to speed up the process. I'm not going to show you the multivariate stuff that we did. I'm going to show you individual traits and kind of get a sense of what's happening through time, as this is still ongoing research. So the main takeaway is that in general, these animals increased in size through time and increased in size at different rates and in different directions. So they're increasing in size and they're changing shape through time. And we know that some bryozoan species respond to temperature. And again, a back of the envelope calculation, for this amount of change, the animal would have had to experience over 27 degrees Celsius of temperature change. So we know it's not the temperature that's driving it. And so again, this is still a research that's ongoing. And a colleague in my lab has looked at competition in these bryozoans, so I'm hopeful to look at the role of species richness and abundance and kind of driving these phenotypic changes. So work by Li-Jing Liao has, and Emanuela Di Martino has shown that in general, it's better to be a larger to overtake the smaller species. And so maybe something like that is happening here. So in response to habitat change, they change both size and shape, and we'll be continuing research to understand what else is happening that might be driving these phenotypic changes. The final example I'll give is one closer to when we're living, and perhaps more relevant for future climate change as well. And it's how this little pack rat responded to a lot of temperature change. So this pack rat, the fossils that we have go back 36,000 years, and we have a really nice time series across space and time for them. And during this time, there's a lot of temperature change. So we had the last glacial maximum, we had the Younger Dryas, we have what's called the 8.2 Ka event, so these cooling periods. And while cooling isn't what is predicted to happen, this rapid change in temperature is, and so we can understand how animals deal with rapid change in temperatures. And also at the end of the Younger Dryas, the increase in temperature has been estimated to happen in less than 100 years. Some people even estimate within decades. So really, really rapid change. This next slide, part of it is clearly missing, but that's all right. What the missing image shows is that their range goes from Canada all the way down to the southwest. We have all of these fossils. At least the image not missing is a picture of these middens. So the pack rats, as their name implies, collects everything from their environment. They collect a bunch of different vegetation. They defecate there. It fossilizes. We get kind of stratigraphy. And their poop, importantly, fossilizes. And poop scales with your colon, which scales with your body size. So we can understand how big these animals are and how they changed. They also live on mountaintops, or on mountains, and so during cooler times, they probably went down the mountain, and during warmer times, they went up the mountain. So there's an amount of elevation that they can do, but what you'll notice is that there's a lot more land or space available at the bottoms of mountains than there is at the top of mountains. So they're limited by how far they can go up. So previous research has shown that these animals respond to temperature change, so we know that they can persist through temperature change, where they follow what's called Bergmann's rule. Animals, when it's cooler, so more towards the left, the left of the graph, are bigger, and when it gets warmer, they get cooler, probably caused by differential mortality, where big critters, when it's warm, overheat, die, and small critters die during cooler times. And so again, a back of the envelope calculation, what we find is that for an average size animal around 350 grams, for 1 degree of temperature change, Celsius temperature change, and we're expected to have minimum 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius of temperature change, would require them going up in elevation by 200 meters, going across the landscape by 100 kilometers, or changing about 1% of their body size. So for all of these, changing body size is probably the thing that is most likely to happen. And what we find is that throughout all that temperature change, these animals didn't go extinct, they didn't go extirpated. We find them across all the sites at all temperatures, and there's not a rate of temperature change that they couldn't handle. So the greatest change, they also changed in tandem with it, which I find quite amazing and very hopeful. And so these animals persisted by adapting in situ. And so they'll likely have to use morphological change to adapt to future climate change, especially with the human impacts of changing habitat connectivity between these mountaintops, and that there just isn't enough mountain for it to go up. So what allows species to persist? I've given 3 examples. It can be through prey switching, changing size and shape, or adapting in situ, all very hopeful, I hope. And so species are resilient and can persist at least during periods of climate change without humans, keyword there. And also, hopefully, I've shown you that by looking at a micro approach within lineage evolution, we can start to understand how these macro processes, how do species stay around and persist. And with that, I'd like to thank a bunch of people who have helped me with all of this work, including the shark research that I did here at the Smithsonian. So thank you very much.
Questions for Meghan? Come down to the microphone.
Sorry, I had to come up to the microphone. So the 3 species you chose seemed to be very different. Was there a reason you chose those 3 and how they relate to each other?
Yeah, so I will say my initial goal in doing research wasn't to understand how species persisted, so I kind of connected them through that. I was really interested in different evolutionary questions. So for the shark, I was interested in, does predator-prey relationships drive body size changes, as has been stated in the literature? For the bryozoans, I'm really interested in how does trait variation affect evolution. And for the wood rat, I was interested in if animals could get bigger at the same rate that they can get smaller. But what I realized through doing all of this is that the only reason why I can ask these questions is because they have been able to handle a lot of change. And it's the change in driving the evolution that I'm interested in. That's what drove me to these different species, because they have, for each question, they had the fossil record that's appropriate to ask the question.
Hi, Megan. I'm wondering if for the pack rats, whether there's been genomic studies that shows whether they've undergone any bottlenecks.
Yes, there were some recent studies by Marjorie Matoch's lab. I don't know what they have found, so I'm not brushed up on that literature, but there have been to look at, I believe, like population structure and that sort of thing, and I presume probably they could understand bottlenecks as well. I'm sorry that I don't know that research as well.
Right, so I was just wondering if they corresponded with any of those major changes in temperature.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but I'm going to now go down that rabbit hole later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Megan.
Hi.
So I am a human scientist. So do you think you could extrapolate from your findings to, will larger humans adapt more easily in the future than smaller humans?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. So what little I know about body size in humans is that it's very nutritional dependent. So it's easier to understand probably shrinking in humans, that are related to genes, than kind of the phenotypic plasticity that humans might have if 2 humans have the same, or identical, and one's given nutrition, and one's not given nutrition, they'll have different sizes, as an example. So likely, access to nutrition will determine survivorship. Yeah.
You might have to repeat it. Do you want to, what is your theory on megalodon extinction?
Oh, yeah, she wants to know about megalodon extinction. So, yeah, there's different hypotheses for why it went extinct. One was temperature change, another one is prey, competition, which is competition with other marine critters, which is kind of hard to test in the fossil record, not for lack of trying, changes in nurseries, and then one that I hope to test is actually that it's random. So animals, there's some background rate of extinction. We don't know what the duration of a shark species is. I'm very curious if Megalodon is the average duration of a shark species. So a colleague of mine thinks it's nurseries. I think it might be random. We'll find out. It's very exciting to test these different things and knock them down to see what's supported and what's not.
Hi, I'm not sure if my question is science or science fiction, but is there any teams or artists or people that are thinking about how might humans adapt to today's climate change in the future, like speculating or dreaming about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure, because there's a lot of creative people in the world, but I don't know off the top of my head. I apologize. No.
Hi. Is there any way you think we might be able to trace disease in the record as a cause of extinction? Because it's very invisible, or it has been, but some of these mysterious disappearances may have involved that factor. And with the biomarker research that is now possible, I just wondered if you have any insights on that.
Yeah, so the research for shark teeth with kind of Megalodon as a example or a case study, they have been able to get isotopes, so possibly that they could, from the teeth, they can start to get some of these markers that you talk about. I don't know if that's what you quite mean, because I don't know biomarkers that well.
It's more right now just a hope and a fantasy, but knowing what is possible to get all this DNA and other information out of even soils and biomarkers in the deep past. So if there are any traces of disease vectors, maybe that would be a possibility.
That would be really cool. And I know that the technology is just improving all the time to push it back deeper with less material. So it's quite hopeful. That's a very cool question.
Please join me in thanking Meghan one more time for a wonderful presentation. During Meghan's time here, Matt Carano was her advisor, and I'm sure he's incredibly proud right now.